To further combat inflation, we will not only be reducing the cost of energy, but will be ending the flagrant waste of taxpayer dollars. And to that end, I have created the brand new Department of Government Efficiency. DOGE. Perhaps you've heard of it. Perhaps. But a lot of money is paid out to people because it just keeps getting paid and nobody does. And it really hurts Social Security and hurts our country. 1.3 million people from ages 150 to 159 and over 130,000 people, according to the Social Security databases, are age over 160 years old.
We are the consumer of 20 trillion.
Yeah. Right.
And this is the key thing. We buy everybody's stuff. So who's more important?
The American economy has become a battleground where hope and despair are locked in a constant struggle. For generations, the promise of a better life, the core of the American dream, has been a guiding light, offering families the belief that hard work would pay off. Today, that promise feels more like a distant memory for many, replaced by growing uncertainty and frustration. We're standing at a critical moment, facing deep economic challenges that touch the lives of millions of everyday Americans. To understand where we are, we need to dig into the facts, look back at the history that brought us here, and examine the bold, sweeping plan the Trump administration has laid out to turn things around. This isn't just a story of cold statistics. It's about real people, struggling communities, and a nation fighting to find its economic footing again. The numbers reveal a harsh truth about how much has changed. In the 1940s, 90% of Americans could reasonably expect to out-earn their parents. That wasn't just a statistic. It was proof of the upward mobility that defined the country, the idea that each generation could climb higher than the last. Fast forward to today, and that number has crashed to just 50%. This isn't a minor slip. It's a massive shift that shows the foundation of opportunity is cracking. The middle class, long the backbone of America's economic stability, is shrinking under the pressure. In 1971, 61% of Americans identified as middle class. By 2021, that had fallen to 50%. This decline isn't only about dollars in bank accounts. It's about losing the security and hope that families need to plan for the future. For millions, the American dream is starting to feel like a promise that can't be kept. Nowhere is this erosion clearer than in the manufacturing sector, once a symbol of American strength and pride. In 1979, the United States had 19.6 million manufacturing jobs, factories humming, towns thriving, and workers earning a solid living. Today, that figure has dropped to 12.8 million. That's a loss of nearly 7 million jobs over 4 decades, a slow bleed that's left deep scars. These aren't just numbers on a page. They're shuttered plants, empty main streets, and families forced to start over. At the same time, wages have stagnated, making it even harder to keep up. Adjusted for inflation, manufacturing workers earned $7.65 an hour in 1970. By 2023, that had crept up to just $9.33, an increase of only 22% over more than 50 years. Meanwhile, the cost of living, housing, groceries, healthcare has soared far beyond that. For hardworking Americans, it's a double hit. Fewer jobs and less buying power, even as they put in the same effort. These struggles don't stop at kitchen tables. They stretch all the way to the federal government, which is wrestling with a financial crisis of its own. The national debt has ballooned to $37 trillion, and the government is running a yearly deficit of $1.9 trillion. Picture it like a household drowning in debt, with a credit card bill so big that nearly $1 trillion of its annual budget goes just to paying interest, not even chipping away at what's owed. That's money that could rebuild crumbling bridges, fund better schools, expand healthcare access, or tackle other urgent needs. Instead, it's tied up, a growing burden that future generations will have to shoulder. This isn't a distant problem. It's a weight on the economy right now, limiting what we can do to fix things. So, how did we end up here? The story starts with big global shifts that unfolded over decades. In 1994, President Bill Clinton signed NAFTA, a trade deal that let companies move production to Mexico and Canada, where labor was cheaper. The impact hit hard and fast. Millions of American jobs crossed the border, leaving workers scrambling. Then, in 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization, flooding the world with low-cost goods. Between 2001 and 2010, the U.S. lost 4.4 million manufacturing jobs as a result. These weren't just economic changes. They were earthquakes that shook entire regions. Cities like Detroit, once industrial powerhouses, became shadows of themselves. Ohio's Rust Belt and other manufacturing hubs saw their factories close, their communities hollowed out, and their way of life fade into history. Trade deals promised prosperity for all, but for many Americans they delivered pink slips instead. Now, the Trump administration is stepping into this mess with a four-part plan to reverse these trends and rebuild America's economic strength. It's a huge, complex strategy that mixes big policy changes with a fresh take on what the country needs. Let's break it down step by step. The first piece is about raising money through tariffs, cutting regulations, and keeping energy costs low. The goal is ambitious: bring manufacturing back to the U.S. and pump an extra $1 trillion into the economy every year. Tariffs, taxes on goods coming from other countries, are the main tool here. They'd make it more expensive for companies to produce overseas, nudging them to set up shop in America instead. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick paints a clear picture. Imagine a 50% tariff on cars imported from Mexico. A company like Honda could build there and sell in the U.S. for $155,000, or build here and sell for $10,000. The choice is obvious, and early signs show it might work. Honda's already planning to make its next Civic in the U.S. Apple's promised $500 billion to create 20,000 American jobs. And TSMC, a giant in the computer chip world, is investing over $100 billion in U.S. factories, the biggest foreign investment in our history. Critics say tariffs could drive up prices and spark inflation, a worry that's not unfounded. Lutnick pushes back, saying inflation comes from printing too much money, while tariffs are more like a tax you can avoid by buying American-made goods. It's a smart argument, but whether it holds up depends on how it's rolled out and how people shop. That's still an open question. The second part is a radical tax idea: no income tax for anyone earning under $150,000. This isn't just a flashy promise, it's a throwback to how America used to run. Before 1913, there was no income tax. The government relied on tariffs instead. The income tax came to fund World War I and stuck around after. Going back to a tariff-based system could lighten the load on working and middle-class families, while using America's trade power to pay the bills. It's a major shift that could put more money in people's pockets, but it's a gamble on whether tariffs can cover the gap. Third, the plan ties into national security by bringing manufacturing home. Right now, the U.S. imports 80% of its computer chips from Asia, along with 13% of its drugs and 70 to 80% of the ingredients that make them. That's not just an economic problem, it's a risk. If a war or crisis cuts off those supplies, we're in trouble. Beyond that, there's a human side. Scott Bessent, a key Trump appointee, talks about how manufacturing jobs gave people more than a paycheck. They gave them pride, identity, and a sense of purpose. Bringing those jobs back could rebuild not just wallets, but communities and spirits too. The fourth piece takes on the government's bloated budget with a new group called the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, led by Elon Musk. They're aiming to cut $1 trillion in spending, a huge goal. For comparison, Obama's 2011 budget cuts trimmed just $20 to $25 billion from a $3.6 trillion budget. Doge wants to use technology to track every dollar and stop waste. A recent example making waves on X shows why this matters. They found $330 million in fake Small Business Administration loans, some going to kids as young as 9 months old. That's the kind of nonsense they're targeting, and it hints at how much fat there might be to trim. There's also a wild card, the Gold Card program, selling permanent residency for $5 million each. Lutnick claims 1,000 sold in a single day, and the plan is to sell 1 million for $5 trillion. Skeptics wonder if wealthy buyers will sign up, since it means exposing their global income to U.S. taxes. It's a creative idea to raise cash, but it's far from a sure thing. Energy runs through the whole strategy. The U.S. has 50 billion barrels of oil waiting to be tapped. Easing drilling rules could lower energy costs, giving industry a boost. The administration says they'll protect the environment, but critics worry it'll lean too hard on fossil fuels and hurt climate efforts. It's a tough line to walk, and public opinion will play a big role. At its heart, this plan bets on America's economic clout. Our $20 trillion market dwarfs China's $10 trillion, and Lutnick's line, "The customer is always right," sums it up. If we flex that muscle smartly, we could reshape global trade in our favor. This isn't about picking teams or waving pom-poms for any agenda. It's about breaking down a plan that could change millions of lives, for better or worse. Whether it works depends on how it's carried out, what happens in the world, and how well it adapts to surprises. On March 25, 2025, we can't know for sure. The plan's ambition is clear, taking on decades of decline with big, gutsy moves. Will it bring back the American dream or buckle under its own weight? That's why we need to keep watching. Think hard and focus on the full picture, not just the headlines. The stakes are too high to look away.